What if I told you I've created the fastest bamboo farm ever built, and I can mathematically prove it? What if I told you it took me 2 weeks of testing to engineer the most efficient design possible? And what if I told you you should probably never build it? Well, in most situations you should. As far as I can find, there are two main bamboo farm designs: flying machines and observer piston combinations. Today, I'm going to show you two entirely new farms, and we're going to test them against the theoretical maximum that any bamboo farm can ever achieve. Fair warning, the second design is absolutely ridiculous and purely for fun, so stick around for that one. So let's get into it. Let's look at how bamboo mechanics actually work. Bamboo grows using random ticks, which is distinctly different from the game tick that the internal clock runs on. The game updates 3 random blocks per subchunk per game tick. I know, that's a mouthful. So what is a subchunk? Well, most of you may know that chunks are 16 by 16 segments of the world. Well, on top of this, each chunk is split into subchunks, which are 16 block tall sections stacked on top of each other. This allows for the code to easily break the world into more manageable pieces for processing. But here's where the math gets interesting. Each subchunk contains 16 cubic blocks. That's 16 times 16 times 16. 4,096 blocks in total. But only 3 of those blocks get a random tick update per game tick. That's just 3 out of 4,096 blocks. So to maximize bamboo growth, we need to pack a subchunk with as many bamboo tops as possible, because only the top segment of the bamboo can actually grow. So let's theorycraft what this looks like. We start with bamboo shoots at layer 1, with mud underneath at layer 0. Since we're really just worried about packing the subchunk with as much bamboo as possible, we'll just assume that the layer underneath the subchunk is mud. Now we can't just stack another layer of mud directly on top of the bamboo because it needs room to grow. And then we place another mud layer above that, then plant more bamboo shoots. We repeat this pattern all the way up until the subchunk is completely filled, which gives us 6 layers of bamboo tops in our 16 layers of a subchunk. This gives us the greatest percent chance that each random tick will cause a bamboo to grow. With 6 out of the 16 layers being bamboo shoots, 37.5% of the first round of a random tick has a chance of causing bamboo to grow. Why is this calculation only for the first tick? Well, the math gets complicated fast. You see, if a bamboo grows during tick 1, there's now 1 less valid block that can grow on the next tick. As bamboo fills the air gaps above it, the probability of future growth continues to drop. But here's the problem. We can't write a simple equation to predict the growth rate, because we can't know which blocks will get randomly selected, and we can't even predict if the same block gets picked twice in a single tick, which can happen. So what do? Well, we simulate it. I use something called a Monte Carlo simulation, which basically is when a system has too much random variation to solve mathematically. You just run it thousands of times, and you average the results together. So that's exactly what I did. 10,000 growth cycles modeled over time. And all I had to do was ask the computer nicely. Here are the results. These graphs show how many bamboo we can expect to grow per tick and per second in our subchunk. Don't give yourself a headache trying to worry about the exact numbers, but the key concept is that we have this initial high probability followed by a sharp exponential decay. And for more digestible information, we can actually take specific ticks and see what the expected bamboo growth for that tick should be. So that gets us to this design here. This is the most compact you can get a bamboo farm. At layer 1, you have bamboo, an airspace above it, piston, and then something to power the piston, and then you repeat the process. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then 16th block is here. You can only fit 3 rows of bamboo in a subchunk. So the question really becomes, at what rate do we harvest this bamboo? And that's where the real challenge begins. What's the number of items we should put in a hopper clock to do the most effective rate of harvesting? And you may be thinking, well, if bamboo's growth exponentially decays, then we want to harvest as fast as possible. Well, I have my game frozen here, and I want to show you guys something. So if I place this observer and put a target block in front of it, or just make this observer activate. If I step 2 ticks, which is the amount of time it takes the observer to recognize a block in front of it and then update the piston, then what we see is that this piston is out for 1 tick, fully extends, comes back, and then retracts. So that's 3 ticks that this piston is extended out and then coming back. 1 in the middle, 1 all the way extended, 1 back in the middle, and then retract. So if you're working with a farm like this and you harvest too fast, what you're doing is you're putting this piston in the airspace above the bamboo. You'll actually decrease the farm rate. So we have to find that happy medium where you harvest the bamboo fast enough to where it keeps that high growth rate, but we don't harvest too fast to where the piston is taking up too much of the airspace above the bamboo. So I created some smaller modules here in order to test the most effective rate of bamboo. So I put different item intervals in each hopper, and I would run it for 5 separate occasions, and I would compare them to one another. I also compared them to the standard bamboo farm, which uses observers with pistons, and the standard flying machine farm, all in one single chunk. And all I would have to do is activate this lever. And so what this did was essentially just unlock each of these farms. And so this is running, and then this was my variant of the original design, where instead of using all observers, you alternate with observer and targets. So when this observer gets activated, it'll power the piston underneath it, as well as these 2 pistons beside it. And the benefit of this is that it takes up only 4 wide, where the original variant that requires all observers with redstone behind it takes up 5 wide. So this is slightly more slim and allows you to fit 1 more row of bamboo inside of a single chunk. It also requires less observers and no redstone. So there's a slight benefit to it, and I wanted to see if this was as efficient as the original all observer piston variant. But once this system did an entire etho hour, which is fairly close to an hour, once that happened, this redstone would extend down and shut off all the farms. So you can see these pistons go down and this farm stops. So this just gave me a simple way to run this farm a few times and get some numbers. So here are the results of the compact farm that I showed, where I wanted to test out different time intervals. And there's a lot of information here, but I really want to focus in on 2 key points. We see an initial spike here at 12 items, and again another spike at 40 items. It looks like 12 items is that perfect spot where it's harvesting just fast enough to keep a high rate of bamboo growth, but not too fast where the pistons are impeding the bamboo growth. As you can tell, when we move to 11 and 10 items, we start getting a very quick drop off. Interestingly enough, as we move away from 12 going forward, it's actually a slower drop off. So the pistons taking up the airspace have more of an impact the faster it goes, but once it reaches a critical point, as you go slower with the harvest, it impacts the farm less. So the reason I'm looking at 12 and 40 items and not just 12 is because 40 interestingly had a jump when I was doing these preliminary tests. And so I even ran the test 5 more times. So 40 has been ran double the amount of times as all of the rest. But if 40 items gets us fairly close to 12 items, and I'm harvesting at a way smaller rate, I would like to do 40 items just for lag efficiency. So that's why I'm looking at 40 and 12. And so how does this compare to the other farms in a 1 chunk area, to the traditional farms of the flying machine and the observer piston? And here's the results. And they're a little surprising. So you can see the 12 count and the 4 count are both neck and neck, and it's about a 2% variation. So doing 12 items is less than 2% faster than doing 40 items for our very compact time-based farm. But you see a real difference when you compare this to the original variants in the flying machine. The original variant with observer and pistons give you about 40% of what you could be achieving for the same area, while the flying machine does a little bit better, and it gives you about 76% 96% of what you could be achieving with the same area of this timed farm. But the reason we see the significant drop off with the flying machine and this compact device is because the flying machine has sticky pistons and slime blocks blocking the bamboo growth for longer periods of time. What we would expect to see, the longer the runway is for the flying machine farm, the better growth rates we'll get, because now the flying machine itself is impeding the growth for a much smaller percentage of the time. We can also deduce that the original variant bamboo farm with just the observers and pistons is the worst bamboo farm you could possibly build. So that's one major takeaway from this, is you never want to build just a simple observer piston bamboo farm. It loses in every scenario. For the same amount of area, you could get a much more efficient farm with either a flying machine or with the compact timed farm that I'm showing you today. And the area of the farm isn't the only variable that we want to consider. So look at this. This is the amount of resources it takes for one single bamboo tile in the original observer piston farm. It requires one mud and one bamboo, which is very standard for all farms. It also requires one piston for every bamboo, one observer for every bamboo, one redstone for every bamboo, and one target block for every bamboo. That's very expensive, especially when you compare it to my poor man farm here that alternates between target blocks and observers and gets nearly the same rates as the original farm. It requires no target block and no redstone. But again, one piston and one observer for every bamboo and mud tile. I'm not considering the hopper underneath because every bamboo farm requires some source of item collection and some use minecarts instead of hoppers. And if we compare it to my bamboo farm here that uses a timed interval pulse, it requires one mud and bamboo, standard, a single piston, but no observer, just one redstone. All of the resources are going into this clock and distributed above. So that means in a way, we have two pistons that are distributed across 256 tiles, one redstone block distributed across 256 tiles, two additional hoppers distributed across 256 tiles. So essentially, these are negligible in calculating the resources per tile, where for my poor man variant, it requires one observer for every tile. In the original variant, one observer and one redstone and target block. In a similar way to my farm, the sticky pistons, slime blocks, and the observers here at the start are essentially negligible when you're considering the resources per tile of the farm. And the larger the farm, the less of an upfront investment this flying machine farm is. Because now, instead of having 12 slime blocks and 2 sticky pistons distributed across only 256 blocks, you have 12 slime blocks and 2 sticky pistons distributed across nearly 750 blocks. And I'm saying this to really just hone in on the idea of why you should never build one of these. They're way more expensive for every bamboo tile you place. So no matter how big you make this, it's going to cost the same per bamboo block you're trying to grow. And since the original variant already calls for one redstone and one piston for every bamboo tile that you place, you may as well create one of these. Because again, the investment is much cheaper. You need no observers for every single tile. Can you imagine if we had an observer on top of every single one of these pistons? That would be a lot of resources. So again, this is much cheaper than the original variant, and it produces a lot more than the original variant. But that was just my preliminary test. We need to do a much longer run. As someone pointed out in my last episode, whenever you do a technical video and you want to do an automated farm, you do it over several hours and you use something called Gnimbon's carpet mod. I hope I pronounced that right. I don't know if the G is silent or not, but it's either Nimbon or Gnimbon. I'm not sure. But anyways, you use this mod and it makes it much easier to calculate the efficiency of your farms. So since we tested my farm's efficiency for a single slice within a chunk, we need to test the efficiency for 3 slices, all fitting in one chunk. So that would give us 3 rows that nicely fit inside of a sub chunk. And I want to compare this to the flying machine, because after this original preliminary test, there's absolutely no reason to compare it to the observer piston farm variant. That is ironically one of the most prominent farms you see recommended on YouTube. Again, please never build that. If you're going to build a small compact farm, build this farm I'm showing you here. To make things fair for the flying machine, I actually did 3 chunks horizontally connected because realistically, this farm's not going to get more efficient if you stack it. So to give this a little bit more of an edge, I gave it 3 chunks long of a runway. So this should give it an equal comparison of 3 chunks long compared to 3 chunks in terms of area. So the growing area is the same. And I think this will give us slightly more comparable data when we look at the efficiency of these farms, because realistically, you're never going to stack a flying machine farm. So it's just not fair to compare that to a stackable tile module like this farm. And lastly, I created this puppy right here. This is the farm I talked about at the beginning that is absolutely ridiculous. So I had this idea. Every farm needs some way of harvesting. Most flying machines, you see an array of hopper minecarts underneath the flying machine. Well, what if I combine the item collection mechanism with the actual output pulse on the pistons? If I start this puppy up, these minecarts go and they fly up and they hit these detector rails and go down, and they systematically pulse each piston. So watch here. It's kind of mesmerizing to watch. And then they'll drop off all of the resources here in these bottom hoppers. So this was actually a little tricky because you don't want to double pulse the pistons. So you can see that we stagger the detector rails here. And so the detector rails are activating the pistons to the side of them and in front of them. And so we alternate every other rail to have a detector. So each piston is getting activated in a row. One of the drawbacks to this is that it has a little bit more of a boilerplate than, say, this design, where here you can fit this design perfectly within a chunk, and then you have your clock pulsing through the middle. Here you have to use 2 blocks on each side in order to give room for where the minecarts drop. On this side, you actually lose 3 tiles instead of just 2. One for the water elevator on the back end, another for the solid block to keep the water in line, and this third one is where the hopper minecarts will drop down. So I wanted to test to see how efficient can this be if the collection mechanism is working at the same time as the harvesting mechanism. So I'm going to compare all 4 of these farms using Nimbon's mod, using Nimbon's carpet mod, and show you what the final results are. And just for transparency, so you know that I'm not making these numbers up randomly, this is the actual results that I got from Nimbon's mod. And so I ran it for only 18 hours. I think technically you're supposed to run it for like 100 or 500 hours to get accurate results. But I would check the results every few hours. They would only vary for about 20 to 30 items per hour. So it's pretty close. And honestly, my 3-month-old is sleeping in the same room with me and my wife. So I don't really have time to run something for 500 hours for making this video. So I ran it for about 18 hours is what this ends up being, 1,084 minutes. The light blue is my timed farm at 40 items. The lime green is my hopper minecart farm that uses the hopper minecart both to collect and pick up items. The pink number is the timed farm for 12 items, which you can see has the best rate per hour. And lastly, we have the flying machine, which is pretty close to our timed piston harvester. And you can see here that I actually forgot to put target blocks on each level. And so that meant that at every level, we were missing this closest corner bamboo. But I did the math and that's less than 1% variation. So it really doesn't affect the rates of this farm. It adds maybe 50 items per hour, which is nothing when you're getting about 12,000 items for every hour. Here's the final results of the 4 farms that we tested doing 3 chunks over about 18 hours. As you can see, the flying machine really closed in the gap, and it gets you about 95% of what the 12 count farm gets you. So that's extremely close for way smaller of an investment of resources. You only have to build 1 flying machine versus needing a single redstone and a piston for every single bamboo tile. So for a much cheaper farm, you can get 95% of the results on a 3 chunk area. The 40 count farm is about a 2% drop, which is the same that we saw for the 1 chunk. So something that we can learn from this is that as you scale this farm up, it actually stays equally as efficient. And if you remember the numbers from the prior farm, we were getting about 4,200 bamboo per hour for the first farm. So if you multiply that by 3, you would get about 12,600, 12,700 items, which is really close to this 12,800 items items per hour you see for the 12 count. As you scale up this timed farm, it stays just as efficient. And you can see with the flying machine, the larger the area becomes, the more efficient it becomes. Where for 3 chunks, if you divide that 12,000 by 3, you get about 4,000, a little over 4,000 bamboo per hour per chunk. But if we did the farm for just a single chunk, we only got about 3,200 bamboo per hour. So again, as you scale up the flying machine, the more efficient it becomes for the area that it uses. And here, coming in last place with the minecart detector farm, which is a really fun design if you want to show off to your friends, but it's only 61% as effective of this 12 count farm. So not the most efficient, but it's still really cool to watch. And I think it's something that could be fun to show off to your friends or just to have on your base. And I did have one more piece of information as well. There's multiple ways that you can count efficiency. One of them is by how efficient is this farm in terms of the bamboo it produces per area as an entire farm. Another one is how efficient is this farm based on the amount of resources I put in to build the farm and the resources that I get out of it. And another way we can look at efficiency is how fast can this farm effectively harvest bamboo at the purest form. I'll explain what I mean. It might sound like I'm just repeating what I said for this first case, but it's slightly different. If we look at how efficient each farm variant does at harvesting bamboo, the original variant that uses the observer and piston is actually the fastest for every single tile in the farm. So that means for every block of bamboo that we're growing, this farm harvests it at a more efficient rate. But the drawback is the amount of volume we have to use to get that effectiveness. So it's never worth it. It's interesting to note that it's the most efficient in this category. Coming in second is the 12 count timed machine and the flying machine. If you look at these numbers, both of them are almost right at 17 bamboo per hour per tile for a 3 chunk farm. But again, as we scale up that flying machine, it's going to become even more effective. Coincidentally, 3 chunks is that sweet spot where the timed farm and the flying machine are getting equal rates. But like I was saying earlier, you also want to consider the efficiency of the resources you put into the farm versus the resources you get out. Your return on investment, so to speak. And the flying machine has a crazy return on investment because for 12 slime blocks, 4 observers, 2 sticky pistons, 2 repeaters, and a couple pieces of redstone, you get the same rate of bamboo as you would for about 750 pistons, 750 redstone, and an etho hopper clock. Which means there's really only a couple reasons you build my timed piston farm. The first is if you want to build a bamboo farm in the middle of your base that doesn't take up too much room. As long as you're within 3 chunks area, this farm will be the fastest by a long shot. You could designate a single building as your bamboo farm and even stack a few layers to minimize the footprint of the farm. The second reason you would build this farm is for a super early game bamboo generator. This doesn't require you to clear out a bunch of open land since you can make it as small as you want. And there's no need for slime blocks, which can be quite difficult to get early on. And if you're just a cool dude and want to have a neat bamboo farm at your base, you could just build this guy here. You can even reduce the size of it to fit nicely on the side of a base for aesthetic purposes, but otherwise don't build this farm ever. It's really just for looks and showing off. In summary, the flying machine wins in every category: upfront cost per area of the farm and bamboo generation, given it's bigger than 3 chunks worth of area. Another boost with the flying machine farm is that while the machine is off, it passively builds up a ton of bamboo, where the timed piston farm does not allow the bamboo to grow past 2 blocks height. Again, this means the flying machine farm will take up a ton more space and could be an eyesore if your base does not mesh well with this. For the most part though, this is a huge benefit. Lastly, we need to talk about the lag impact of both of these farms. The flying machine constantly has 10 to 20 blocks updating every few game ticks, depending on how wide you make it, while the timed farm updates dozens or hundreds of pistons within a single tick every so often. This is not bad compared to the observer piston farm because it also updates a ton of pistons at a time, but we shouldn't compare the lag efficiency of the timed farm to the worst possible bamboo farm you can build. Again, never build one of these farms. This timed farm, however, falls flat on its face when you compare its piston updates to the flying machine's block updates. Having these large-scale block updates all within the same tick costs major processing power and can really be a drag on your server or single-player world, particularly as your world gets bigger and bigger. So as much as I hate to say that my research did not achieve the dream of revolutionizing bamboo farming, it's just really hard to beat the tried and true farm of the flying machines. But There's always a reason people stick to the tried and true methods, and sometimes you have to learn that the hard way.